Hi, folks. You are very, very welcome to this week's episode of Genos Live. And it's one genuinely I'm very, very excited about because we have Paul Zak in 2 days after his book launched, and I think one of the first interviews that he's done. And I'm delighted to be able to tell you that you're in the presence of a bestseller. His book in 2 days, in fact, within 24 hours, went to number one on 4 lists in 4 categories. So it gives you a sense of what we're going to be looking at today. So here's your opportunity. Interestingly, Paul is a very, very clever guy. And what he's done for the launch period is he has put the book out on Kindle at 99 cents. So if you scan that QR code, you will be dropped into the page where you can get a copy of the book for 99 cents, which is quite a considerable comparison with the price if you were to buy it in soft copy or hard copy. And if you're not good at scanning QR codes, some people aren't, after the session, just go into Amazon and search for Paul J. Zak Immersion. I guarantee you it's the first thing to come up. So don't worry if this disappears before you get an opportunity to scan it or to grab that, because I promise you I'm going to show it a couple of times more, because I got an advanced copy and I've been working my way through it. And I'll tell you, it's just an absolutely fabulous piece of work. And like all good work in this sort of space, it builds on some stuff that you've heard before and understand, and starts to make links between it and brings in some absolutely new and very, very highly applicable theories or research and approaches. And we're going to look at those in some detail. Now, before we do that, let me do the traditional that we do at this time. I'm going to ask you, first off, pop into the chat. Elaine will pick it up in a moment. She's in the background, as always, doing all the work while I get all the pretty work on the front end. Tell us where you're dialing in from. And tell us, of all of the things you do for your work, which one really gets you utterly engaged? And to use some of the language, which one do you think really immerses you? Now, after we've spoken to Paul, you'll have a better sense of what we mean by immersion. But, you know, if you had to take one thing from what you do in work on a daily basis, and that would really light your fire if you were doing that all the time, what would it be? So just pop that into the chat. And while you're doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about us, about Genos International. I'm going to try and do it in a less dry way than people normally do this. So let me ask you, and this will be a familiar question to some of you who know us, what are the first 3 words that come into your mind when you think about the best boss you ever worked for, in terms of how they made you feel? Not what were they like. How did they make you feel? Did they make you feel depressed, angry, down, excited, motivated, engaged? What are the first 3 words that come into your mind? And you can pop them in the chat if you like. We probably won't get to them, but I just want you to bring them into your mind. And then in the same way, I want you to think, and I apologize for this, of the worst boss you ever worked for. What are the first 3 words that come into your mind for how did that person make you feel? So how did you feel going into work on a Monday morning, on a Sunday? How did you feel on Sunday night knowing you were going into work on a Monday morning with this person? Now, the reason I ask that is because it really points at one of the most robust findings in the social sciences, and that is that the way we feel has a dramatic impact upon our performance. And we do a longer version of this exercise. We'll do it in a session at the end of this month, in fact, on Genos Live, where we ask you to contribute via a poll. And here are the sort of words we tend to get for the best boss. So you can see there are all the sorts of words that you hope your kids say if somebody says, how does your dad or your mum make you feel? And you hope your colleagues say, or your direct reports say, when you say, how do you make them feel? Because you intuitively know what the research shows, that if you feel valued, happy, appreciated, relaxed, positive, and all these sort of words, that you intuitively know that that person's going to be more engaged with you. Just like you intuitively know that if the first words that come into your mind are anxious, stressed, isolated, anxious, unappreciated, demotivated, and I see for the first time ever, I see gaslit appearing on that list, we just know that that's going to impact performance dramatically. And that just points at the way we define emotional intelligence. Because here's the reality. Here's what the research tells you. The way that you show up, the way that I show up, the way everybody shows up, determines the way the people around us feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they're capable of engaging. And the extent to which they're capable of engaging pretty much determines everything about the outcome of that. And that's the essence of emotional intelligence. It's about the way you show up. And that's what Genos do. We're in the emotional intelligence business. I forgot I had this quotation from Bill Markline. I've only picked it up in the last few days. I think it's lovely. Culture is how your employees' hearts and stomachs feel about Monday morning on a Sunday night. So what we do is we help people and their clients, if you're an independent coach, consultant, and trainer, to help people to show up in a way that puts them into those productive emotional states that gets the best engagement and the best results and the best productivity. And we do that with emotional intelligence assessments and programs. And we must be pretty good at it because we've been one of the top 20 assessment companies for the last several years. We also accredit people to do that. So if you're a coach, consultant, and trainer and you want to bring this into what you do, or you're an internal coach, consultant, and trainer, well, then you can certify with us. Our last certification program for 2022 is coming up in October, and you could be out on January 1, long before January 1, with a brand new credential. If you're an independent coach, consultant, trainer with a brand new business line. If you're interested in it, Elaine is going to pop in a link to the certification page, or an email if you want to mail us. And as I say, it's starting very soon. 6 weeks' time, you could have a brand new credential. Okay, so I asked you where you were dialing in from. I asked you what floats your boat. Before I bring Paul in, let me bring Elaine in and just say to her, hi Elaine, welcome to your second ever Genos Live session. Tell me, where are they dialing in from?
So we have people dialing in from all over the world as usual. We have Romania, Colorado, Latvia, Ireland. Over on our website, we have South Africa.
Okay.
So we really are global. We have everyone covered here, all nations. So it's great to see, and people are sharing their words for their bosses. So we have the positive side of things. We have Jeanette saying she felt encouraged, excited, and engaged, the 3 E's. And then on the opposite side, for, when she didn't want to go to work, she felt defeated, discouraged, and wanting to leave. So you can see a huge difference there. Two ends of the scale.
Makes the point, absolutely. And tell me, what were people saying really floated their boat? What did they feel really engaged them or immersed them, or that they really love about what they do right now?
So again, Jeanette was in with her comments. She had coaching leaders to produce unprecedented results.
Okay.
And then I think the comments are just slowly making their way into us this evening. We're probably catching people at that moment where they're just getting ready to pack up and leave, and they're all a little bit tired after the day. So
on this
feel
side
free
of the
to
world,
drop your comments in, guys. We're here watching them.
Super. Well, thank you for that, Elaine. Let us bring in the man of the moment, and Paul. Congratulations, number 1 in 4 categories in 24 hours. That is no mean feat.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's really gratifying. It's years and years of work, so 15 years of my life in this book. So, hopefully it's creating a lot of value for readers, and how about even some enjoyment?
Yeah, and I think there's some really great, and I'm not, there's a little pun which you'll understand, and some people have read it, some great war stories in there as well. Some really, really great stories of this stuff out in the wild. Before we dive into our conversation, and let me ask, Elaine, will you just do a little bit of a formal introduction to Paul and give the folks an idea of Paul's background, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone, allow me to introduce Professor Paul J. Zak to you. Paul is Professor of Economic Sciences, Psychology and Management at Claremont Graduate University. Paul has also founded 4 technology companies, including the first neuroscience as a service platform, Immersion Neuroscience. In addition to being a 5-time TED speaker, Paul is also the author of several best-selling books, including Trust Factor, The Science of Creating High-Performance Companies, and The Moral Molecule, How Trust Works. And Paul's latest book, which Derek has mentioned, Immersion, The Science of the Extraordinary and the Source of Happiness, just launched this week to rave reviews. So, Paul, you're very welcome to Genos Live, and we're excited to have you here, as are our people here in the comments section. So again, I'll say to people, drop in your comments, let us know what you're thinking, and we are so happy to have you.
Great, thank you, Elaine. And you'll give me a little wave from the green room there
Yep.
when we have a couple of questions sort of appearing. So Paul, let's get into it. And I told everybody that I put the book up again, and let me just put it up for a few minutes, and then we'll make it a little bit more intimate in a moment. But just folks, as I say, I've been reading this over the last couple of days. It's a really, really solid read. And I'm sorry to harp on it, and I don't want to cheapen it in any way, but 99 cents for this book is just extraordinary. So I'd get and scan that, because I don't think it's going to be around. That offer is going to be around for too terribly long. So Paul, people who are on the call will remember you as the oxytocin and trust guy from the moral molecule, and I think that's, when you say Paul Zak, that's what people most immediately jump on, the whole trust thing. And I'm guessing, and I am guessing because I'm sure there was an awful lot before that, but to me, all of that oxytocin work feels like the genesis of all this. Can you tell folks what oxytocin is and why it's important to say this conversation, in fact, to every conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Derek, and thank you for the very kind words. About 20 years ago, my lab developed a protocol to measure the human brain's acute production of oxytocin, and we first showed that oxytocin motivates trustworthy behavior, cooperative behavior, greater empathy, more effective teamwork. And as we started doing this work, we sort of expanded how far we could understand what this neurochemical did. And in our little inside joke, part of that was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense and some other three-letter agencies, let's say, that tasked us with taking that knowledge that oxytocin seems to be this core neurochemical signal of cooperation, of teamwork, of effective social connection, and asked us if we could create a platform for the military to train soldiers to be better communicators, to reduce conflict. Awesome. I am down with that. And that was the origin of creating the Immersion platform.
And tell me, just to get a sense of it, what I always say to people, and you're probably going to tell me now I'm wrong, and do so. I always say to them that the first time your mama picked you up, you got a jolt of oxytocin. She got a jolt of oxytocin that made you want to bond and made you want to feel, or made you feel closer and want to come closer to that person. And that ever since, any time that you've got any sort of contact with folks, and particularly, I guess, physical contact, that we tend to get again that dose of oxytocin that creates that want to connect. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, right? This is a chemical the brain's making. It's deep in the brainstem, evolutionarily old parts of the brain, that allows human beings to live around other people, to work around other people. So our brains of social creatures, of social mammals, we have many, many receptors for oxytocin that make us acutely sensitive to social information. And so, as you said, Derek, as we're around individuals, that emotional intelligence derives from our ability to pick up these social cues. I think where the neuroscience comes in is to kind of optimize that, to understand that I may be doing things consciously or unconsciously that drive people away or bring people towards me as a leader, as a team member. And my lab spent 20 years trying to figure out what those things are. And one that we everyone knows is high levels of stress. I'm stressed out. Think of stress as reducing my neural bandwidth. I'm just trying to get through the next 10 minutes.
Sure.
And then I don't have time. I don't have the metabolic power to synthesize oxytocin, to be a great team member, to be more empathic. And so when we think about how to structure organizations, how to structure...
Okay. Paul seems to have frozen there. Let me... You were talking about oxytocin, and as you move through the world and you interact with people, and the way it's ebbing and flowing in your system. That's more or less where we were.
Yeah, and the difficulty with that is that this protocol we developed to measure oxytocin involved multiple blood draws, and that's invasive and painful, even when my perfect phlebotomy is involved. And so we were asked by the U.S. Department of Defense to create a system for them to improve communication for soldiers to reduce conflict. And for that, we use electrical signals. So because we know where oxytocin receptors live in the body, in the brain, we can measure that. But we found that it wasn't just oxytocin. You needed to have an attentional response first. And that attention is driven by the brain's release of dopamine, another neurochemical, binding to the prefrontal cortex. So when I have this attentional response driven by dopamine plus an oxytocin response, which tells me that this information is emotionally resonant to me, I've called that state immersion, kind of sucked into this experience. And it radically drives behavior. So immersion strongly correlates with information recall weeks later, with the enjoyment of the experience, and with a desire to repeat it.
Okay, and tell me, and please tell me, just as you're talking there, and you were talking about that level of immersion, you were saying you get that injection of dopamine when your attention is really captured like that. Would it be a wrong characterization, in a very loose way, to say it sounds to me like kind of flow with an emotional resonance kind of added on top of it? So that whole thing of where you're totally wrapped in something, but there's also that extra hook of the emotional resonance where you're really, if you like, feeling it, and that's essentially what immersion is. Or am I off?
No, you're similar. I think, again, flow classically is associated with doing an active task. You can actually be passive and be immersed in experience, like watching a movie. I've heard, not you and me, Derek, because we're too macho, but I've heard that some people actually cry at movies, right? That's an example of immersion, right? It's as if you are having this experience. But we see that on a lesser scale all the time. When I have a wonderful customer experience. In the book, I talk about checking twice into the Four Seasons of Sydney, Australia, and they knew my name, they knew my room number. I mean, it was just like so personalized. It was such an amazing experience. I became an immediate Four Seasons fan. Right. This is the best experience ever. I want to repeat it. So that was happening to me. I wasn't really actively doing anything. But yeah, I think it's the concepts are similar. The difference for immersion is that we create this platform to democratize neuroscience so that using a smartwatch or fitness sensor, anybody can measure neurologic immersion in real time, any place interesting things are happening. So once you have that granularity, you can begin to create extraordinary experiences for employees, for customers, for communication, content, training, education. So the book talks about all these.
Okay, and as you were talking particularly about movies, and by the way, folks, I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler on this. Paul does admit in the book that he's a movie crier, and damn proud of it. And I am one of these macho movie criers where I'm doing this all the time, trying to flick the tear away and keep that stiff upper lip. But actually, when you talk about the whole movie side of things, if we take that as an example, typically in Hollywood, they spend millions, sometimes hundreds of millions on a movie, and then they pile people, maybe 20 bodies, into a cinema, and they say, hey, what do you think of it? And they decide whether it's a dud or whether it's going to fly on the basis of their evaluation. And if I'm getting it right, in your book, you say that those sort of evaluations don't actually work, or at least they certainly don't work the way measuring people's immersion work. Is that correct?
Right. So I think we're asking the wrong question. The liking question is too poorly defined. Liking compared to what? And, it's I say in the book, just because our brains create language, we think we have some insight into our unconscious emotional states, which we just don't. So if you force someone to put a number on how much they like the movie, they will. But unfortunately, that just doesn't predict outcomes, right? Most movies lose money. And there's an interesting philosophical dilemma there for creatives, which is the creative person who's trained and very smart and all that thinks, if I love it, other people will love it. But actually, that's not always true. Yeah. So that's why testing, I think, is important. And testing deep in these unconscious areas requires a piece of technology.
Okay, so let's say I've just finished my masterpiece movie, and I really want to get this right, or maybe I've just completed some segments of it just to see before I go and put my millions and millions into it, and I want to get it right. Tell me how it works. So what do you do? How do you equip people? What's in the background? How does it work?
Mm-hmm. So you grab people who have supported smartwatches or fitness sensors, or give them some, like here's a lower cost one that works just wonderfully.
Okay.
And you say, look, we want to have you watch some of our dailies or watch some clips. And, there's this old saying in the stock market, to cut your losses early and let your winners run. It's the same kind of thing when you're creating entertainment content or marketing content for that matter. If you have really immersive experience, allow it to grow, allow it to live and breathe. If it's kind of sucky, again, you can't be immersed 100% all the time. These data are kind of a sine wave because your brain just gets fatigued. So let those really powerful emotional experiences run. How long? To me, that's a data question, right? As you see that data, okay, now it's time to drop it off. So we see this in ads. So because of the correlation between information recall and immersion, for example, in advertisements, you want to have the branding or the call to action, if possible, occur at an immersion peak. Right? That's the thing you're going to remember the most. If you look at so many ads, from movie trailers to advertisements, on TV, it's a little mini story, and then the story concludes, low immersion, and then there's a branding moment at an immersion trough when people are like, they're already checked out, they're not going to remember it. So, measurement allows me to say, okay, let's put the branding either earlier, which is really interesting, or keep that emotion high and then go, holy crap, this is the coolest thing. Click here and do this thing now.
Right. And Elaine mentioned earlier on that you were a 5-time TED speaker, and that's something you talk about, how the TED principles and what they advise TED speakers to do in order to grab people's attention, how they work really, really well. And by the way, folks, if you're an aspiring TED speaker, you really should dive into the book because there's some really, really interesting guidelines on it there. So looking at that, if you're looking at, say, immersion during something that's as short as that, and I know they've gone to 5 and 10 minutes now, would that imply, and I know you can't generalize, but would that imply you get what you want to hook them on in at the earliest opportunity, the earliest time at least, when they are showing themselves immersed? Is that the essence?
Yeah, so two parts of that, Derek, which are very good questions. One is you got open hot, right? Your brain just wants to idle. It's lazy. So hit me hard, hit me, so a lot of, moderate, not so great TED Talks, they start, say, in a chronological story. No, think of a great fiction book. They start with the most exciting scene, and then you can backfill and explain where that scene came from.
Sure.
So, my book starts with me getting my butt chewed out by, let's say, an operator who was in a war zone. And, it was, holy crap, that really happened. And it was, kind of scared the pants off me. So, I'm going to explain that scene later in the book. And the other general rule is that shorter is almost always better in terms of immersion. So the brain really gets used to the same kind of content. And when you see that over and over, your brain just doesn't care as much. And so I've got to get you to care about this content. And that caring is emotional. It's that oxytocin driven, like, oh, this really resonates with me. This is for me. So create that story. Hit me hard, hit me fast, give me something to do, and then go home. And by the way, we mentioned story. That narrative arc is a great way to keep people immersed in a piece of content, whether they're talking about training, a movie, right? We want to have that narrative arc, build tension, and then if you're trying to influence somebody, customer, employee, then have that call to action at the peak of that narrative arc. Hey, here's the story. This is why it's important. Here's the conflict that these characters are having. These characters look like you or sound like you or could be you. This is what you need to do now.
Okay. So let's have a look. I took the liberty of stealing some stuff from your website, an example of the platform in action. So, folks, I want you to imagine that you're an audience who have been selected to help judge the way or the extent to which this Coca-Cola advert would grab people's attention. And correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but each of us watching this would have on our fitness device. And that would be connected, presumably via Bluetooth, to the Immersion app. which is collecting our results as we're watching this in real time. So I'll put up the piece of video, and maybe you can just talk us through what's going on, folks. So just so you understand that this is actually happening real time. Imagine what Paul's platform is doing is it's giving you a direct insight into a neurological phenomena, immersion, as and when it happens. So by second, you can see the extent to which people are captured by this piece and not. But let me not talk about it. Let me put it up, and I'll shut up and I'll let you narrate this, Paul. Let me make sure I have this.
I will.
There we go. So let me start this off. So up the top, folks, you have the advert. Down the bottom, you have the platform. Over to you, Paul.
Perfect. So if we play this video, we can see that it's a Coke commercial. It's actually a 2-minute gig. So the platform automatically identifies these areas as good, great, or not so good. So gray is fine, you're around the average. Green, super immersion, and red, not so much. So now we have a story. We have a close-up. Okay, this is interesting. This is unusual. We haven't seen this kind of crazy dancing before. We're getting close-up of faces. And this is where the branding moment should be. High immersion. And yet, for some reason, these wonderful creatives decide, I want to tell a different story. I don't know what the story is. I'm checked out. I don't know who these ladies are. They're making faces, right? And now they do this dance thing again. So now I'm kind of liking it, right? My immersion starts to go up. But if I look at the totality of this little 2-minute film for Coke, it's much too long. So as I said earlier, if they had stopped at 30 seconds, which is just after that green component that says 69, they should have had that call to action. Coke is the best thing ever. You need to buy it now. And they didn't. They decided to make a little film. I don't know why. And that film really dissipated the energy. So again, think of immersion as tension in your brain. Also, what's missing from this, again, this is sort of awareness branding. If this goes on, this was on YouTube. We got it from YouTube, and this is real data. These are real brains that we collected a little while ago. Where's the hot link, right? If you give me tension, the tension's going to dissipate when I do my next task, whatever I do next. After that little 69 green part, it should have been hot link. Buy Coke now on this link, right? Give me something to do now. So again, what this lacks is a story structure, narrative structure, much too long. All this is superfluous. And now we're back to the original guy. And the branding here occurs in an okay part, but not great. It could have been so much better, right?
Yeah.
So, it's just not great. Now, intuitively, again, I'm sure whatever agency made this, these people are very smart. They're very well trained. Sure. They were sure that this would be awesome. And as you know, Derek, from the book, we've had clients and our own tests in the lab, the ability of immersion to predict sales bump from advertising is in the 83 to 98%, depending on the kind of ad and where it's placed. And so higher immersion, higher sales. Isn't that what you want? That's the ROI from advertising. Well, this famous quote from John Wanamaker, half my advertising doesn't work. I just don't know which half.
Just don't know which
half. So now you know which half, right? And you know actually how to make it better. There's no humans who can say second by second, I'm liking this, I don't like this, right? You need technology to do that. And I think what's interesting about the book is we seem to, through 20 years of just hard research, found this valuation mechanism in the brain that tells you that it is really important to the person watching it.
And looking at this, as you say, if that had been cut off just at the point, can I put a cursor in there? I'm not sure if you're seeing that cursor there, but just around that little red. If that had ended there, and the call to action, the branding, which was about a quarter of it, that would have been vastly less expensive to make. And vastly more effective in terms of the impact, and they could potentially have run it 4 times and got so much more impact. I'm assuming you say they're very, very clever people, and I don't doubt they're very, very clever people. And I'm assuming that they probably did some kind of market test and asked loads of focus groups and said, "What do you think of that?" "Oh, it's freaking great! Love the dancing! It's wonderful, and it's sassy and all this sort of stuff." And still, this gives you something that you just can't get. This is coming directly from that neural reaction.
Yeah, and I think it's just because it's repetitive. It's kind of the same story. So, have a human scale story, have one character or a few set of characters in a crisis doing something awesome. Stop. That's it. All you need is one narrative. Now, there's like 4 narratives here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and as you say, they could be sliced up into 4 ads that would have that same look and feel and just a slightly different presentation. And possibly if you'd seen the first one and then you saw the second one, it might resonate more because, hey, I recognize that funky dancing, etc. Yeah. You mentioned in there, and you mentioned it in the book, you talk about creating that tension. So when somebody is in a state of deep immersion, that's the time when it's creating tension, and they need out of that tension. Could you talk a little bit more about that and why it's important?
Right. So like in real life, we avoid tension, but in storytelling, in selling, in creating employee experiences, we actually want that tension. We want that moderate level of stress to say this is important. Stress is an arousal response in the brain that says, "Holy crap! Don't sit on your butt. Do something about this." And so that's when really that call to action's got to occur. And what's interesting, and this is just through dint of hard work and trying lots of things, not that we knew this in the beginning, is that people dissipate that tension by doing something. And so it would be so easy in this Coke ad to just put a link to, I don't know, if you can buy Coke on Amazon or whatever, wherever you buy Coke, click here for a coupon, whatever. People will click, right? You put this tension in their brain. And so I think to lose that opportunity is really sad.
And of course, those opportunities are not just, it's very, very easy to see in a commercial situation where you're selling, but they exist in every situation where you're trying to engage people to take action of any description, right? When they're fully immersed, there are those same points of tension that represent the best opportunity to further engage them or to get them to take the action you want them to take.
Yeah, the second to last chapter of the book, as you know, is called The Business of Love. And it's the same thing. This is ultimately about pathways in the brain that tell us about love broadly understood, right? I love my job. I love the people I work with. I love my customers. I love my family, right? Those are very, very similar pathways in the brain, and immersion taps into that. So we can really understand how to create extraordinary experiences for all the people we interact with if we think about the principles. So I should say the book doesn't tell you got to measure stuff. It says, hey, I measured 50,000 brains.
Yes.
Here's the kind of trends I found. So there's, each chapter is very actionable. Like, do these 5 things and you're going to have a better customer experience. Do these 5 things, you'll have a better employee experience.
Perfect. Let me just, I'm going to pull Elaine in just for a second and just say, hey, Elaine, have we any comments, questions coming in there? Because I know where I want to go with Paul on this and just hop on it. But what are we getting on the chat? Oh, we've lost you. Your audio's gone.
Yeah, we lost Elaine.
Well, holy God.
That's my problem. I muted myself.
That's good. It's not. I was going to blame the internet. There you go.
The heart skips a beat again over me. No, I was just saying, unfortunately, because we had the interruption, we seem to have lost a lot of our comments. But to make you guys just feel better, I've researched it, and LinkedIn is having a major fault at the moment. So it seems to be a global issue on LinkedIn. So it seems like everyone is after getting kicked off, and there's no functionality on it at all at the moment. So it just seems that we hit it at its worst possible moment.
Buy a lotto ticket. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Elaine. Not to worry. Let's push on through. So tell me, Paul. So we call this creating immersive employee experiences, and one of the really hot topics right now for all of our clients, and I say ours, I mean the people who will watch the recording, the people who are on the call, and I know for your clients, is psychological safety, and people are talking a lot about that. I think it's been even highlighted since COVID. If you were going into a large organization and they said, you know what, we want to create psychological safety, but we've been doing surveys and we've been taking action on surveys and it hasn't really been getting the results I want. How can you help me? Can you tell me how would we go, or how would you go about doing that? What would it look like? How would it work in a practical sense?
Right. So from an employee perspective, they get much more satisfaction from the work if they're deeply immersed in it, as you said, almost like a flow state. And so that's measurable. one of the inhibitors, as I said earlier, of being able to be immersed is high levels of stress. And so psychological safety is a notion of the stress I feel being around other humans.
Okay.
And it's sometimes difficult to articulate that. So I developed a physiologic measure of psychological safety that we can pull passively by applying algorithms to your smartwatch and assess whether we as supervisors, we as leaders are creating environments of psychological safety. Again, I don't want that to be zero. I want you to be on. You need to have some, kind of arousal response. But when you're over aroused, you're just burning bandwidth if I'm not psychologically safe. So I think this is so compelling, Derek, as we look at return to work and hybrid work. So during the lockdowns, that were everywhere, a number, as I talk about in the book, a number of large companies, including some technology companies you would know, started using our platform to assess psychological safety of their employees because everyone went remote. And what we found is that psychological safety can be radically influenced by the actions of people who lead meetings, that is supervisors and leaders. So effective leaders would increase psychological safety in the course of a meeting, where poor leaders would drive it down. So less psychological safety means I have less bandwidth now to be immersed in the information, to remember the information. I'm demotivated. So I don't have a video of these meetings, but just looking at all the immersion data, I'm imagining that these are people who are kind of stressed out. Like, okay, we got 10 minutes left in our meeting now. We got to do this thing. We had them, and they're stressing out their team, as opposed to saying, hey, you guys, look, we are behind on these 2 milestones. What do you think we should do to get there? Right, being inclusive as opposed to being top down, blaming other people, being stressed out. So to me, that is human nature to be stressed. It's okay, we get stressed at work, but having an objective measure as opposed to, well, my employees are saying I'm not a nice person and I don't believe them and they're just a bunch of gold brickers, whatever. And we just have physiologic data and I mean, such interesting patterns. So I know a lot of companies that are doing hybrid work now see a lot of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday people in the office. What's happening Mondays and Fridays? Well, I can kind of guess, but we also find consistently that remote workers are less psychologically safe than in-office workers. So as I talk about in the book, let's lean into that. How about pizza and beer Friday nights in the office? How about an award for people who show up, 8 days in a row for work? The leaders need to be in the office. If you want people to be in the office, you better be in the office. So, think about using all these kind of key insights from physiology to create not only a more productive workplace, but a workplace where people feel comfortable and can be really creative and productive.
Right. So from the example that you said there, let's say I wanted to give guidance to my team leaders on the extent to which they're creating maybe in their virtual meetings with their virtual people, the extent to which they're creating psychological safety. So you would have the people who are joining that meeting. Would be wearing the device. They would be connected up via the app. So we have something like the Coke ad a little bit while the meeting is playing, while the meeting is rolling out. You've got that data being collected, and you're getting a sense of the ebb and flow of the immersion, and then getting a sense of the psychological safety in that. One of the things that I found really interesting, and it's maybe it's a lack of education on my part. But I always tended to think of psychological safety as something when you create it, and as long as you maintain it, it's there. But what the data really shows is, as we get tired, our psychological safety goes down, and as we get stressed, our psychological safety. So it's continually going like that. So it's not like, oh, I've created a psychologically safe environment, I'm done. What sort of in environments where you've done that? In what way does that help you to guide those folks on what they do next? So you got the general guidelines like, hey, overall the data shows that people who are remote workers have less psychological safety. Let's see if we can create more hybrid and create more connection. When it comes to taking that data and saying to Derek, you know what, that meeting, it didn't really create psychological safety. What does it enable you to? Do you get what I mean? How can you advise them?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's two or three ways you can use this. One is training, right? So if I
Okay.
see that some subset of managers continually have low psychological safety and others don't, I say, look, whatever you're doing is not working so well for your team. Let's have some additional training so that
Okay.
there might be a company we could call that can help us. Teach you how to do some more psychological safety. Yes.
Hmm.
The second is for employees to begin to monitor themselves, right? So I call this neural job crafting. If
Okay.
I find out, like companies like Google, where on average every 3 weeks people join a different work group, as I'm in this group, I really fit in. Like I'm just digging it. The people are awesome. The work's great. And then they move these other work team, and man, I do not like this. I don't know what's going on. So again, we're running out of bodies. We got to
Hmm.
keep the people working with us, and keep them emotionally well. And if they're being beat up every day because of low psychological safety, man, they're going to quit. They're certainly not going to perform as well. So the employee is empowered to look at his or her own data.
Hmm.
And then I think lastly, I'm really concerned with the DEI issues here. So if I have a much more diverse employee pool, which we all want,
Hmm.
if I'm the only African American male in my group, do I feel comfortable filling out a survey saying, I don't really feel comfortable here? But if I have physiology and I can start finding patterns, again, we don't have any personally identifiable information on the site, but if I
Sure.
find, this group is actually, this group of employees that I can identify on average are actually not doing very well. Okay, what happened here? We got a different manager. We hired different employees. So again, that's a need for education. Let's teach people about emotional wellness. Let's teach supervisors to be more inclusive, more caring. I know this sounds kind of woo-woo to people, but you've got to be kind. I mean, I love my children to death. I hold them accountable. The people who work with me, I love them, but I hold them accountable. We have milestones to hit. If you can't hit these milestones, the whole organization is going to fall apart.
Sure.
And that's not good for anybody. It means you lose your job.
Yeah.
You're unhappy. I'm unhappy. So I think, there is that balance, which is hard. And I think this is where objective data are really useful.
Yeah, and so I'm starting to get a really clear picture, and I think the Coke thing helped a little bit. But you in the commercial environment, I can see where you could be tracking psych safety, and definitely I think it's fairly intuitive to where you could fine tune training. In that way, to be watching, and you give a few examples of that in the book, where you can watch the immersion and watch where the flat points are, and then adjust the training so that you eliminate, or maybe not eliminate, but at least ameliorate that issue, so that you get something that's more overall immersive. So on the day that I say, God, I love this stuff, I absolutely love it, does your organization come in as a service, or do you sell me the platform and I give them the apps, and how does that whole side of things work?
Yeah, we're software, so it's meant to be so visual, so clear, like with that Coke ad you showed.
Yeah.
That it should be fairly obvious on what you need to do. I do think that there is a place for companies like yours that kind of take that data and come in and go, hey, you guys have a problem, or you're facing some challenges, and how do we kind of mix it up? How do we get some fresh ideas in here to solve those problems? So we do see more and more coaches using our technology, and many of the professional services organizations that you would know their names, particularly use our technology when they do organizational transformation. We've got to get people on board. They've got to I hate to use the word immerse again, but they have to immerse themselves in this new situation that we're creating. And I think oftentimes having someone from the outside go, look, we collected this data, we spoke to people. I'm not saying the only thing you do is measure immersion. We spoke to people, we got this information. Here's what we think is happening. Here's where we want to take you.
Yeah.
And we're going to build a pathway to get you there. It somehow is easier when an outsider, at least when I've done it, and I'm sure in your experience as well. Coming from the outside, you have fresh eyes, you have fresh approaches,
Sure.
and you can kind of move that organization to the next level.
Okay, so for people who are on and are watching the recording and who are independent coaches, consultants, trainers, or people who are in the L&D department inside larger organizations, they can get their hands on the platform, and they don't have to have Paul and the team come along. They can get their hands on the platform, they can implement it, and they can begin to use it and build their data so that they can use it whatever way makes most sense for the organization.
Yeah.
Perfect. There's folks. Just to tell you, Paul very kindly had agreed to do has agreed to do a session. Let me see if I can get that working. Had a session specifically for Genos certified practitioners on the business and how getting into the nitty gritty of how this works. And I haven't actually discussed it with Paul because we didn't have a minute or two beforehand. But I'm unless Paul has a problem, I'm proposing we open it up to anybody who wants to come along, who's seen this recording or whatever, and wants to get a sense of what is the business side, how does it work, what's the nitty gritty, and kind of roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty. So if you are an independent coach, consultant, trainer, if you're a Genos partner, if you're an internal L&D person, you're a psych safety person, you're an engagement person, what in your organization, Elaine is going to pop a link in for the invitation to this. It's happening this time next week, same time on the 22nd, and it's a great opportunity to go a little bit deeper on the practicalities of this whole thing and see how it would work and how it would work for your business. So Paul, I think it's amazing that we can get what is a really, really dense book, and I think it's an indication of just how well you know the topic, into such a short, tight, and totally comprehensible package in such a short period of time. I'm looking down at Elaine, and I'm just saying, give me a thumbs up if there are any questions there, and if they're not, I'm going to... Okay. Yeah, so we lost a couple of people when we lost LinkedIn, so we've lost our questions and our comments on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to say, folks, the book is really an outstanding piece of work. You really need to grab a hold of it. If you're a person who likes having the tangible hard copy, well then go ahead and buy it. It's not expensive, but man, if you have a Kindle or you have the software, it really is the way to go. So Paul, I can't thank you enough. It's a really fascinating area, and it's one that certainly we look forward to diving into with you in more detail. We look forward to seeing you next week. I hope you will hang around just for 2 or 3 minutes so we can thank you, and apologize for LinkedIn screwing us up as well. So thank you very much. Let me just go to, let me see, where should I be? I should be here. Yeah. So again, not to belabor it, get your hands on the book. It's really a wonderful read, and all you need to do is put in Paul J. Zak Immersion into your favorite bookseller site, and it'll be the first one to come up. As we said to you before, we've kind of got a who's who of people running weekly between now and December 1st. Next week we have David Burkus. And David, actually, it's really interesting the way things link up. David actually refers to Paul's research in his book, where he's talking about leading from anywhere. Very, very topical, and very topical, I think, given the comments that Paul just made about psychological safety and managing that, because David talks about that in hybrid environments and remote environments, how to create a culture that makes it more possible to create the results that you want. Again, Elaine is going to pop the link in. All you need, if you're already registered for live, well then you're going to get a reminder for this. If you're not, please do register, and we'll get a link out for you. But meantime, I look like kind of mini-me down in the corner there. Meantime, I want to thank you. I particularly want to thank the folks who, I know from Elaine and from the conversation we were having with you while we were getting Paul back, that there were several folks who stayed on, through the little blip in the middle. I want to thank you for taking the time to do so and hanging on in there. And for those of you who are looking at the recording, you've probably no idea what I'm talking about, because I will have edited out that big chunk in the middle. So looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for taking the time out of your life to come and see us. Thank you so much to our guest speaker, Paul. And we will see you next time on Genos Live. Take care, folks.